Welcome to retrolistHQ, where we bring back the games that time forgot. Today we're traveling back to Sega's little handheld, the Game Gear. Most people remember Sonic running across that tiny screen. Games that dared to be different, and in many ways, ahead of their time. Some stayed in Japan, never making it to the West. Others were overshadowed by bigger console releases. But every single one of them has something worth revisiting in 2025. So sit back, let's dust off those AA batteries, and rediscover some magic. And before we jump in, don't forget to subscribe to retrolistHQ. Released in 1991, Axe Battler was Sega's attempt to take the Golden Axe series in a new direction. Instead of the side-scrolling beat-em-up fans knew, it mixed RPG elements with action combat. You moved across a world map, entered towns, and then dropped into side-view battles. For a handheld in the early 90s, this was surprisingly ambitious. The game borrowed inspiration from Zelda and other adventure titles of its time. Did you know Axe Battler was one of the very first spin-offs Sega attempted for its franchises? The swordplay is simple, but the exploration feels refreshing for such a small screen. Towns are filled with NPCs, offering hints and tiny story moments. It's more than just fighting. It's about progression and discovery. Most people dismissed it because it wasn't the Golden Axe they expected. But looking back, it shows how Sega was willing to experiment. Even with its flaws, it's one of the rare Game Gear titles that tried to be more than an arcade port. The cartridge now feels like a time capsule of early handheld ambition. Have you ever wondered what Golden Axe would look like as an RPG? This was it. Axe Battler proves that even side projects can hold their own kind of charm. Sylvan Tale launched in 1995, but only in Japan. It plays like a mix of Zelda and Secret of Mana, packed into a handheld adventure. The game's protagonist can transform into animals, adding depth to puzzles and exploration. Did you know fans actually translated Sylvan Tale into English years later? That's how most people outside Japan finally got to experience it. The art style is colorful, but the story leans into mystery and fantasy. The soundtrack, despite the Game Gear's limitations, sets a surprisingly moody atmosphere. Unlike many handheld games, this one asks you to take your time. You're rewarded for exploring instead of rushing. Boss battles push the system harder than you'd expect from a small cartridge. Sylvan Tale often feels like the Game Gear's Secret Zelda, and yet almost nobody talks about it outside of hardcore collectors. Have you ever discovered a game years later and felt like it was made just for you? That's the feeling Sylvan Tale delivers, even today. It's a hidden treasure that deserves more love. Released in 1992, Defenders of Oasis stood out immediately. Instead of medieval castles or fantasy forests, its setting is inspired by Arabian folklore. The game blends turn-based battles with a rich, unique story. Did you know this was one of Sega's first handheld RPGs with a full narrative arc? Its world feels different. Sand dunes, palaces, and genies. The characters feel alive, even on such limited hardware. The pacing is slower, but it pulls you into its desert kingdom. For many players, it was their first taste of handheld role-playing. It asked for patience, but rewarded you with depth and atmosphere. In some ways, it feels like a precursor to bigger RPGs that came later. Its uniqueness is why it still stands out all these years later. Did you ever expect a handheld RPG to look and feel this ambitious in 1992? Defenders of Oasis may not have the fame of Final Fantasy, but it carries its own identity. And sometimes, that's exactly what makes a game unforgettable. A rare gem, born in the sands of Sega's imagination. Tails' adventure launched in 1995, right at the end of the Game Gear's life. Unlike Sonic, this game isn't about speed, it's about exploration. You guide Tails through sprawling levels, using gadgets instead of raw speed. Did you know Tails' adventure is often considered an early Metroidvania on handheld? Instead of blasting through stages, you collect items that unlock new areas. The pace is slower, but it lets you think and plan your path. The game feels experimental, like Sega was testing a new style of platformer. And for Tails, it was his chance to step out of Sonic's shadow. Players discovered that this little fox had more depth than expected. The soundtrack is quiet, almost calming, which makes it stand out even more. It's one of those games you don't expect to hold up, but it does. Have you ever played a spin-off that surprised you by being better than expected? Tails' Adventure is exactly that kind of experience. It's not perfect, but it's brave and different, and that's why it deserves a place on this list. If you're enjoying this dive into forgotten Game Gear titles, make sure you're subscribed. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these stories alive. Now, let's move on to number 6. Crystal Warriors came out in 1992 as one of the first tactical RPGs on a handheld. It was Sega's attempt at strategy gameplay years before Fire Emblem became well known. The game revolves around elemental matchups. Fire beats wind, wind beats water, and so on. Did you know Sega planned this as the start of a small RPG series? Each battle feels like a puzzle where placement matters. The interface is simple, but it works surprisingly well for the Game Gear. It challenges you to think, not just fight. Characters grow stronger, which makes every choice matter more. It's a slow burn, but deeply rewarding once you learn the mechanics. Few people even know it exists today. Have you ever stumbled on a game that feels like a lost chapter of gaming history? That's exactly what Crystal Warriors is. It's not flashy, but it proves strategy can fit on a tiny handheld screen. And without it, we may never have gotten its underrated sequel, a forgotten pioneer of portable tactics. Released in 1994, The Sword of Hadja is one of the few strategy RPGs on the Game Gear. It's part of the larger Shining Force series, but scaled down for handheld play. Did you know it was originally exclusive to Japan before being localized? The game keeps the grid-based combat and fantasy world intact, even on a small screen. Characters still have personalities, despite the limitations. Every battle feels like a tiny chess match with swords and magic. It's not watered down. It's surprisingly deep for a portable version. Many players never knew this game existed, since the main series was more famous on consoles. Have you ever discovered a spin-off that holds its ground against the mainline entries? That's exactly what the Sword of Hadja does. The battles are tough, but fair, teaching patience and planning. Even today, the pacing makes it easy to pick up and put down. It feels like a hidden portable chapter of a much bigger saga. If you loved Shining Force on the Genesis, this is worth tracking down. A true handheld gem that deserves more recognition. Released in 1991, Ninja Gaiden on the Game Gear isn't just a port, it's its own adventure. The story is original, setting it apart from the NES versions. Did you know this was one of the few handheld exclusive Ninja Gaiden games? The controls are tight, even on that tiny D-pad. It captures the spirit of fast-paced swordplay, with quick jumps and sharp combat. The difficulty is there, but it's balanced better than the notoriously brutal NES titles. The stages push the system to its limits, with detailed backgrounds and smooth movement. Each level feels like a proper challenge, not just filler. Have you ever been surprised when a handheld version outshines its console cousin? That's what this Ninja Gaiden does. The bosses stand out, with attack patterns that keep you on your toes. It's a game that proves handheld action doesn't have to feel lesser. The soundtrack, though compressed, still drives the intensity forward. It's an often overlooked entry in a legendary series. For Game Gear fans, it's one of the best action experiences you can have. Psychic World arrived in 1991, quietly slipping onto the Game Gear without much fanfare. It's a side-scrolling action game with a twist. You use psychic powers instead of just weapons. Did you know it actually started on the MSX computer before being ported here? You control a scientist rescuing her kidnapped sister, which gives the game a unique story. Instead of guns or swords, you unleash elemental attacks. Fire, ice, wind. It all feels different and adds variety to combat. The game mixes science fiction with supernatural themes, which feels rare for the system. Stages range from laboratories to forests, each with their own hazards. Have you ever found a game where the concept alone feels ahead of its time? That's what Psychic World delivers. It's not as famous as other side-scrollers, but it carries a charm all its own. The progression keeps you experimenting with your powers instead of spamming attacks. And the boss fights really push you to use those abilities smartly. It's the kind of game you remember not because it's perfect, but because it's different. Psychic World deserves to stand alongside the Game Gear's more famous titles. Dragon Crystal was released in 1991, making it one of the earliest roguelikes on handheld. Yes, before roguelikes were trendy, Sega put one on the Game Gear. Did you know every dungeon floor is randomly generated, giving you a new experience every time? You start with almost nothing, and survival depends on careful moves. Each step you take advances the enemies too, forcing you to think ahead. The game doesn't explain much. You learn by trial and error, but that's part of its appeal even today. Your companion, a mysterious floating egg, follows you everywhere. Have you ever played a game where the strangest detail becomes the most memorable? That egg eventually hatches, but only if you survive long enough. Items are often cursed, forcing you to take risks when picking them up. It's punishing but strangely addictive. Dragon Crystal feels like a forgotten blueprint for the modern roguelike craze. And the fact that it was on the Game Gear makes it even more impressive. A tough, experimental gem that still holds up in 2025. Released in 1996, Arena. Maze of Death came out right at the end of the Game Gear's life. By then, most people had moved on, which is why so few remember it. Did you know it's often considered one of the best-looking Game Gear games ever made? The game is an isometric action shooter, which was rare for handhelds. You move through futuristic levels, blasting enemies with a variety of weapons. It feels like a miniature action movie running on a tiny screen. The graphics are shockingly detailed, pushing the system harder than most games dared. Enemies attack from all sides, keeping you on edge. Have you ever seen a handheld game that feels like it shouldn't even be possible? Arena. Maze of Death gives exactly that impression. Its sci-fi story is simple, but it sets the stage for non-stop action. The pacing is quick, making it perfect for short bursts of play. Sadly, because it came so late, very few people ever owned a copy. That rarity makes it one of the Game Gear's most overlooked masterpieces. If there's one game to prove the handheld's hidden potential, this is it. And that wraps up our look at 10 forgotten gems from Sega's Game Gear. These aren't the usual suspects. They're the games that dared to be different. Some were bold experiments, others hidden treasures buried by time. But all of them show just how much the Game Gear had to offer beyond Sonic. If you're enjoying these dives into gaming's hidden corners, subscribe to retrolistHQ. It helps us bring more forgotten gems back into the spotlight. Until next time, keep exploring and keep the retro spirit alive.